Your life did not go quiet by accident. You did not slow down because you were lazy. You did not lose momentum because something went wrong. The silence that dropped over everything, the calls that stopped, the ideas that went flat, the mornings that felt like walking through concrete, that was not random. That was not failure. That was not the world forgetting you. That was something else entirely. Something with a shape. Something with a purpose. This has already been happening. You just did not have the words for it yet. And once you understand what the silence actually is, not what you feared it was, but what it actually is, you will never misread it again. Welcome. If this is your first time here, this channel exists for one reason: to give language to the things you have been feeling but could not explain. Subscribe now, because what we explore here is not surface level. It goes deep, and it stays with you. Today we are looking at 7 signs that your silence is not what you think it is. Stay until sign number 5. That is the one most people find impossible to explain away. And the final sign, sign 7, changes the way you move through the world permanently. Sign 1. The silence arrived right after the noise peaked. Think about the moment it began. Really think about it. Chances are, the quiet did not creep in slowly. It dropped, like a curtain falling. And right before it fell, right before everything went still, you were moving faster than you had ever moved. Deadlines. Decisions. The constant hum of something urgent. Your nervous system was a live wire. And then, one day, it was not. This is the first sign the silence is meaningful. It arrived as a direct response to your peak. Not to your failure. Not to your low point. Your absolute peak. There is a researcher at Harvard named Tal Ben-Shahar who spent years studying what happens to high achievers after they reach the goal they spent years chasing. What he found is not what most people expect. He called it arrival fallacy. The moment you land, the moment the project closes, the milestone hits, the finish line is crossed, the brain does not celebrate. Collapses. Because the entire reward system was built around the chase, not the destination. When the chase ends, the reward circuitry has nothing to fire at. And so it goes quiet. Not because you failed, because you finished. The silence did not arrive because you stopped matching. It arrived because your brain just ran a marathon and sat down. Sign 2. You can feel it in your body. Not your mind. Your body. This is the detail that most people overlook. When people describe this silence, they never say it lives in their thoughts. They say it lives in their chest, right behind the sternum. A dense, cold pressure, like something heavy was poured into the space where your excitement used to live. They describe shallow breathing, not panicked, just limited, as if a deeper breath would hit a wall. They describe a heaviness in the limbs, a fatigue that sleep does not fix, a low-grade physical weight that follows them from room to room. If this is in your body, that is a sign. Because emotions live in the mind. But this kind of silence, the kind we are talking about, lives in the nervous system. And the nervous system does not lie, and it does not dramatize. It simply reports what is true. What it is reporting when it creates that chest density and throat heaviness is that your system spent everything it had. It is not broken. It is empty in the way a cup is empty after it has been fully used. Something is coming in sign 3 that might make you rethink a moment from your recent past. A moment so small you probably dismissed it. Stay with me. Sign 3. The thing that triggered the silence was almost nothing. This is the sign that confuses people the most. Because they look for the big event, the dramatic break, the catastrophic ending. But it was not that. It was something tiny. A short email. A brief conversation. A notification. A date on a calendar arriving and passing. Something that, on the surface, carried almost no weight at all. And yet that tiny thing, that almost nothing, is what flipped the switch. One woman described finishing a decade of building an independent creative business. The moment her final launch closed, she received a 2-line message from her team. Received. Thank you. Good work. And those 4 words, those 4 polite, indifferent words, dropped her into a silence she could not explain for months. It was not the words that did it. It was the contrast. The contrast between the enormous internal storm of everything she had poured into that work and the absolute flatness of the world's response. The universe did not rise to meet her moment. It just moved on. And that contrast between your internal magnitude and the world's ordinary pace is exactly what creates the silence. It is not abandonment. It is a mismatch between the size of what you carried and the smallness of how it was received. The silence is your system registering that mismatch. That is all. That is everything. Sign 4. You pulled back from people. But not out of anger. You stopped answering texts. You skipped events you would normally have attended. You let conversations go quiet. And if someone asked you why, you would have struggled to explain it. It was not resentment. It was not sadness exactly. It was more like depletion, as if you had been spending from an account that was now empty, and every social interaction was a withdrawal you simply could not afford. Researchers call this emotional exhaustion. Christina Maslach at the University of California, Berkeley spent decades mapping what happens when a human being spends too long giving too much. One of the first things to go is the ability to connect, not the desire. The ability. The nervous system quietly closes the social circuits as a form of self-preservation. It is not coldness. It is conservation. The silence you created around yourself was not you shutting people out. It was you being redirected inward. Because what needed attention was not out there. It was in here. Sign 5 is the one that most people cannot explain away. Because this one does not just happen around you. This one happens through you. Sign 5. You started interpreting the silence as a message. At some point during the quiet, something shifted. You stopped fighting the stillness and started listening to it. Maybe you called it intuition. Maybe you called it the universe speaking. Maybe you were not sure what to call it, you just noticed that in the absence of all the external noise, something internal became audible that you had not been able to hear before. This is not spiritual illusion. This is neuroscience. A researcher named Wolfram Schultz mapped what happens inside the brain when the expected reward stops arriving. When the momentum vanishes. When the feedback loop goes dark. The brain, deprived of its usual external inputs, begins generating signal from within. New patterns emerge. New priorities surface. The internal voice, the one that was drowned out by the deadline noise and the inbox flood and the constant motion, finally has enough quiet to be heard. Carl Jung called it the voice of the psyche finding its way through transition. Not the ego's preferences. Not fear or habit. The deeper signal. The one that only speaks when everything else has stopped demanding your attention. You were not imagining it. You were finally quiet enough to hear it. This is not a coincidence. The silence is the condition required for the signal to reach you. It had to get loud enough to be unbearable before you would stop moving long enough to receive it. Sign 6. You tried to force your way out of it. And it held. You made plans. You set new goals. You tried to manufacture momentum with schedules and productivity systems and new projects. And for a while nothing moved. The silence held its ground. The heaviness did not lift. And you began to wonder if this was permanent, if this was just who you were now. It was not. But the silence was not ready to release you yet, because it was still working. Here is what most people misunderstand about this phase. They assume the silence is waiting for them to do something, to figure something out, to earn their way back. But the silence is not waiting for your performance. It is waiting for your surrender. Not surrender as defeat, surrender as release. The willingness to stop gripping the old version of your momentum and allow something slower, something more solid, to take its place. The people who try to sprint through this phase, who force themselves back into motion before the silence has finished, often end up back inside it again within a year. Because the silence was not a punishment you could outrun. It was a process you had to allow. The ones who let it finish, who sat in the uncomfortable quiet past the point where it felt like it should have ended, came out the other side producing work that had a completely different weight. Less frantic. More grounded. Built from something internal rather than chased from something external. The silence was not stalling your life. It was rebuilding the foundation. Sign 7. The silence is already lifting, even if you cannot feel it yet. This is the final sign. And it is the one that changes everything. Because here is what is true about this stage. The people who are watching something like this, who felt drawn to a title about the universe going silent, are not in the deepest part of the silence anymore. They are at the edge of it. They are in the part where the questions start returning, where the curiosity starts flickering back on, where something small catches their attention and they feel, for just a moment, something almost like interest. That flicker is the sign. That small returning pulse of wanting to understand, wanting to know what this was and what it means, that is the silence beginning to lift. Neuroscientist research on dopamine recovery shows that after a long motivational void, the first signal of return is not energy or enthusiasm. It is curiosity. Small questions. Gentle reaching. Before the engine restarts, the lights come back on. Your lights are coming back on. The Stoics had a way of describing this that has not improved much in 2000 years. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the natural state of things that stillness is not the opposite of life, it is the ground life grows from. That what feels like abandonment is often just the earth between seasons. Nothing has been taken from you. Something has been composted. Something has been broken down into the material for what comes next. The universe did not go silent because you lost your place in it. It went silent because you were between chapters. And the silence was the ink drying on the last page before the new one was turned. Here is what I need you to hear before you go. The deepest fear underneath this experience, the fear that lives in the chest heaviness and the shallow breathing and the withdrawn mornings, is that the silence means you have been abandoned, that your effort was invisible, that you are no longer relevant to the life you were building. That fear is not the truth. The truth is what the silence was protecting you from finding out too soon. That the version of you who went into the silence and the version who will come out of it are not the same person. And the distance between them required quiet to travel, required stillness to cross. You did not lose your momentum. You outgrew the direction it was carrying you in. And something in you, something wiser than your ambition, called a stop. Not to punish you, not to abandon you, to give you enough silence to finally hear what you actually want to build next. Stop waiting for permission from the outside world to begin again. The world will not send a dramatic signal. It will not rise to meet your internal magnitude with fanfare. It will simply be there, ordinary and ready, when you decide to step back into it from a different place. That place is quieter, more deliberate, built from something real, and it is already forming in you, right now. Underneath everything that still feels heavy, the silence was not the end. It was the preparation. If any of this found you at the right moment, if this was the language you have been waiting for someone to say out loud, leave a comment below and tell me this. Tell me where you were when the silence hit. Not what caused it, just where you were. What room? What time of year? What it felt like when the quiet dropped. You will be surprised how many people were standing in the exact same room,